call the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Municipal Land Use Board of the Borough of River Edge. Today is Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. The time now is 7:31 p.m. This meeting of the Municipal Land Use Board of the Borough of River Edge is being held remotely and recorded via Zoom due to Borough Council chambers unavailability and is in compliance with the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act and associated regulations. Notice that this remote meeting was published in the Bergen Record on October 6, 2022, posted on the front doors of Borough Hall and posted on the borough's website. The notice included the dial-in and login information necessary for public participation and access to this meeting remotely. A copy of the agenda for this meeting was made available on the borough's website near the posting of the meeting notice and included the dial-in and login information. During the public comment period of this meeting, if you would like to make a public comment, please press the raise hand button on Zoom or dial *9 on your telephone keypad to raise your hand. The board will address you by name or by the last 4 digits of your telephone number. You may mute and unmute yourself by pressing the microphone icon on Zoom or dialing *6 on your telephone keypad. You must state your name and address clearly prior to making a public comment. With that, Ms. Steinle, I'll turn over to you if you call the roll, please.
All right, Mr. Mayor,
Here.
Mr. Caslin,
Here.
Ms. Boland,
Here.
Mr. Merman,
Here.
Mr. Pfeffer.
Here.
Oh, there we go. Mr. Cray,
Here.
Mr. Arakelian,
Here.
Councilman Knigo is excused. Mr. Gibbons,
Here.
Mr. Esposito,
Here.
Mr. Bastide.
Here.
All right, also present is our planner, Tom Behrens, and our engineer, Robert Costa.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Steinle. We're going to take the items on the agenda this evening a little bit out of order, just for housekeeping purposes. The first, first item this evening, we're going to review the approval of minutes for the meeting of February 8th, 2023. The draft of the minutes was circulated to the board prior to this evening's meeting for review. Open it to the board for any comments or questions on the draft minutes. Okay, there being none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved. Oops.
Okay, I think I got a first from Ms. Boland and a second from Mr. Cray.
Yep.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, any abstain? Do we have any?
Mr. Gibbons was absent that day.
Mr. Gibbons is out.
Yeah, I'll abstain.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. The next item for this evening, is the memorialization for Mr. Juan Nunez. Property location is 830 Kindercanack Road, Suite B. This is block 212, block 23. Any comments from the board on the memorialization? Okay. There being none, I will look for a motion from the board to approve it as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Ms. Steinle?
So that was a motion from Mr. Cray? Or I didn't hear, sorry.
I think it was Mr. Bastide.
I thought it was Mr. Bastide. I think the second was Ms. Boland.
All right. Okay, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Mr. Caslin,
Yes.
Ms. Boland,
Yes.
Mr. Merman,
Yes.
Mr. Pfeffer,
Yes.
Mr. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Arakelian,
Yes.
Mr. Esposito,
Yes.
and Mr. Bastide.
Yes.
All right, the motion passes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Next item this evening, we need to pass a resolution concerning the execution of the developers agreement in connection with the application for the Dunkin' Donuts that was approved a few months ago. Ms. Steinle, maybe you can just give a quick synopsis to the board of what's happening on that agreement.
Yes, so under the Borough Code, and the municipal land use law, any public improvements that are required as part of a development on a site plan requires a developer's agreement with the town. Historically, River Edge has also involved the planning board to sign off on the developer's agreement as well. So I've circulated the draft agreement, and we're just looking for a vote to authorize in the resolution, I put the acting chairman because Mr. Arkelian was ran those meetings for that application. And then either Mr. Gibbons could attest to it or Mr. Merman, however you'd like to proceed on that.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Okay, in that event, I will open for a motion on the to authorize the execution of the developers agreement in connection with the Dunkin' Donuts application.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I think I got Ms. Boland in on the second there.
All right, and I'll start with the mayor.
I think I'm excluded because of the nature of it. I was not excluded.
Oh,
from
and you
these.
were not part of the okay, yes. So, and Mr. Caslin recused himself from the application as well. So Ms. Boland,
Yes.
Mr. Merman,
Yes.
Mr. Pfeffer,
Yes.
Mr. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Arkelian,
yes,
Mr. Gibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Esposito,
Yes.
and Mr. Bastide.
Yes.
All right. Motion passes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll come back to the food handler's license. We'll leave that for the last business item this evening. All right, next item on the agenda this evening, under correspondence, this pertains to a letter we received from the River Edge Shade Tree Commission, which was requesting our board's review and discussion of a proposed ordinance regulating trees on private property in relation to applications that are heard by this board and via the building department. A copy of that letter was circulated to the board prior to this evening's meeting, and we have with us this evening as well in the audience, we have Liz Stewart, who is the chair of the Shade Tree Commission. Good evening, Liz.
Hi, hello. And we also have Henry Semler in the green. He's also one of the commissioners.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Good evening, Henry.
Hello.
So what I'd like to do, I guess, is since you're here with us this evening, if you would we have your letter? Would you maybe just give us a brief summary of what your request is and what your intentions are in terms of the proposed ordinance?
Sure. So thanks for having us. We've been having in the Shade Tree meetings discussions about tree preservation on private property because we already have a public ordinance for protecting public trees during construction. And we have a very specific ordinance for that. And as the borough arborist, I do the tree evaluations for that. And then Henry and I are usually the ones monitoring the activity that goes on. And we were just seeing more and more clear cutting going on on a property. And for many of the times, it's not within the footprint of the house. It's usually the entire property that gets clear cut. And then we're seeing issues, or we hear from residents, because we're the Shade Tree Commission, all of the problems that they have associated with that in the neighborhood, the flooding, the stormwater problems, the buffer, the neighborhood has changed. So we're hearing all of that through us because our name is Shade Tree. But we realize that, and if the town wishes to go through with an ordinance like this, it really needs to go through a planning board or a zoning board. It can't be through Shade Tree. That's not our domain really, even though it's about trees. So we thought maybe it's time to bring this up with the planning board because we're hearing it all from our side and maybe bringing it to your attention and seeing what you think about maybe pursuing something like this. Also, we understand it's not a popular idea. Traditionally, this is just something that usually mayor and councils do not want to do. Residents get upset about it. But I can tell you all of our surrounding towns are either have enacted something like this or in the process of doing it. I'm the arborist for Englewood, and for Ho-Ho-Kus, they're contracted arborists. Englewood has one of the strictest ordinances that I've seen, and I think it's too much actually. But they enforce it and they have a lot of clear cutting. I was just reviewing something today. It was 150 trees that were being just clear cut for a house and a pool. So then Ho-Ho-Kus is in the process of doing an ordinance, and I met with them yesterday to come up with something a little bit more reasonable and for a smaller town or for smaller lots, and something that maybe the residents can go for, or a contractor. It would be targeting a contractor, really. That's what the point of it is, not to penalize homeowners for wanting to do work on their property. So if a homeowner wants to remove a tree, we understand that's not where we're going with this. It's the clear cutting. And if you got the letter, we kind of provided a few examples of that. There are many, many more. And that's kind of the overview of where we're going with it.
Okay, thank you for that. At this time, open it to the floor, to the board for comment, questions.
Mr. Castle?
Mr. Givens.
So I read your letter, and just, I guess you said there are some that are very restrictive and some that aren't. So what, I think you said Englewood was very restrictive. Like what do they have that is so restrictive, and what are some that are too restrictive, or what are you thinking in terms of what you want? Is it a percentage of trees that can stay, or, where are you with that and your recommendation, I guess?
Well, I think our recommendation, it would be like a process, but Englewood is regulating every tree on every property. You have to submit an application to the engineer, and then they go from there and determine. And then I'm usually called in to determine if the tree is dead or not, or what the size of it is. Their goal is to restrict clear cutting, but it affects everyone in Englewood, and it's a restriction on the property owners. Oradell just enacted this ordinance last year, and I helped them develop that one. And it seems very reasonable because it's doable. You're not involving volunteers. They actually don't have a shade tree, but it goes through the planning board, the engineer. So it's very much like, and then Hillsdale has one. Ed had provided an example of Hillsdale's, which is also very reasonable, where I think they allow 2 trees a year, or it's a certain amount of trees within a year that you can take down without having to do. You would submit a permit, but then if it's approved that it's within the 2 or 3 tree requirement, you don't have to pay for the permit. If it's over that, then you go through the whole permit process, is my understanding of that. So it would be, there's a few different ways you could do it, and you could just tie it into big construction, just like we do with the street tree one. It's tied into construction that's over 50% of the current building, if it's going to be improved. I think a good example of this that has worked in our town that's reasonable is the 7-Eleven, which is a commercial project. But Ed got me involved, and the planning board got us, Shade Tree, involved in going over the plantings with the planner, and we went back and forth, and we were able to kind of keep a buffer around the outside. But they did not have to follow anything that we said, really. But I think the planning board would have approved it or not. But we worked out something where it's reasonable for everyone. They kept a buffer around it. They took down a lot of trees, but they're replacing trees with reasonable replacements, and that kind of works for everyone.
So is Oradell, is the Oradell one for any homeowner that wants to take down a tree, or is
No.
that a new construction kind of thing? Like
It's tied to construction, zoning, if you're putting in a pool, soil movement, things like that.
So bigger developments, not just somebody that just randomly wants to take a tree out of their backyard.
Yeah.
I guess, I'm certainly open to the idea. I guess there just has to be, I would think there had to be some sort of either a percentage or a certain amount you can take. Cause I have 1 tree on my property, but you might have 7, and if, and the 1 is in the way of mine, you don't want to cause a problem for the person that has 1 tree and it's in the way of the construction. I don't want it to be cumbersome for the homeowner.
Usually
Certainly I
anything-
don't like seeing all these trees getting knocked down either.
Yeah,
with the houses.
Right. Usually what happens is it's anything within the footprint of the development is usually not regulated. So
Okay.
that would fall under where, if there's a tree right in the middle of a house, or a driveway, let's say, they're expanding or putting in a deck with the big construction, usually with whatever's within that footprint, but it's really the trees around the the buffer that we're seeing. You know, some of those examples along the park, just clear cut everything, a tree on the corner that's like a 150-year-old tree that was on the park almost, and there was no reason for it. It's not even like they had construction material there. So now that's affecting everyone in the neighborhood. So, and then we hear all the complaints about it. And now our park trees are going to be affected by that.
Right.
So it's
What's
What's the
affecting everyone.
criteria, what's the criteria for evaluation? Because if we're talking about trying to write some sort of ordinance or some sort of, some sort of standard that has to be followed, there's got to be some sort of measurable standard. I mean, if it's subjective, then it just becomes, what do I like versus what does somebody else like?
So I think the goal is that they come in with an application through you, and that's why you need to be involved in this, and it should come through you. And it would be where, if they want to remove every tree on the property still, they're still going to be allowed to do that. You wouldn't restrict it necessarily. We're trying to deter it. But if they decide that a huge 150-year-old oak that's in good condition, they want to take it down, there would be a table saying this tree is 30 inches. You need to replace, whatever the table says, 5 trees on your property, or you have to give $3,000 to the town into the tree fund, and then we replant somewhere in town. So it would never, ever being saying to them, you can't take a tree down. So they always have an option, but if they want to take the tree down, they have to give back somehow to the community, because those trees, unfortunately, they're sitting on someone's private property, but they are community trees. They can't get up and walk away like a deer or something, like they're stuck there, but they're providing a benefit for everyone, yet they're on private property. So I think that balance is never restricting them to take down anything, but trying to encourage them to keep it if they can. And if they can't, then they pay back to the town.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Pfeffer.
Yeah, my sense is that probably most, if not all, members of this board are receptive to the idea of having some sort of, or either an ordinance or some sort of policy. But my suggestion is that we need something concrete to look at. We need something specific, a proposal that we can then add to, take away from, modify, because right now it seems a little bit abstract. And I agree with Mr. Cray saying, we want to avoid being subjective about this, where, we could spend all night talking about, well, I'm in favor of removing 2 trees, but definitely not 3 trees, or, and go back and forth like that. And what are the criteria? Is it just the number of trees, or is it the placement, the location of the tree, the size of the tree, the value that the tree is contributing to the community? All of those things need to be considered, as well as the level of burden to the homeowner. So it's really hard to have a real discussion and come to some sort of conclusion unless we have a concrete proposal presented to us.
I think the
So that's
idea
what I
was
would
that we were
suggest.
just fact finding, because also we knew the mayor would be on this, and we would get everyone at once, and maybe some council members, just to see. We didn't want to put a lot of time into creating something if nobody was for it. If we came here and you're all like, no, that's not happening in this town ever, then that's it. But if everyone is in agreement that they would like to pursue it, we can offer some suggestions and a draft that everyone could look at. Sure.
That's what I would think would be a necessary next step.
Yeah.
With no guarantees. Nobody's committing to saying yes or no, but maybe it at least starts the conversation focused on something specific.
I had a few follow-ups. One, most of these applications for these new constructions, we never see them.
Yeah.
They don't come before our board. So I guess, are you proposing that if they're adding on, I guess there would have to be some mechanism to have them come to us, because no developer in town is going to spend their time waiting for us, and come to the planning and zoning board. So we never see them. We see the people that want to put a pool in and a deck, and, we see the residents. We don't see the builders. So if this were to go forward, there would need to be some sort of mechanism to force the people that are doing these bigger constructions or adding on a certain amount, that would force them to come before us to get an answer on, from us. So just to put that out there. And then the second one, you mentioned a number of like $3,000. Would it be like a sliding scale kind of thing That if you take down a small tree, it's $1,000. If you take down an ancient tree, it's $3,000 kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a table by the diameter of the tree, so the width of the
That's what
tree.
you were saying. Okay.
And if there's anything dead or diseased or really doesn't look good, it doesn't fall under that.
All right, thank you. And I agree. We definitely need to see some other ordinances, to kind of come up with, I guess, what we feel is fair.
Yeah, I think tonight's purpose is really, I think, just to gauge the board's interest. I think you're all making, and I share your sentiments, but I think for tonight's action was really just to get the board's sentiments as to whether, there's I guess interest in pursuing this further and giving consideration to it. We have the letter here, and we have Liz just gave us her approach from where she's coming from.
So maybe we should hear from Marina. Marina, if I'm not mistaken, this body does not have legislative jurisdiction in this area. That would be for the mayor and council. This body is simply advisory. But if you could speak to the law, that would probably help put this conversation in context.
Yes, so thank you, Mayor. The Land Use Board and the Shade Tree Commission can work together to help draft proposed ordinances to present to the mayor and council. Ultimately, it's up to the mayor and council to introduce them. Since this proposed ordinance would affect land development, the ordinance after introduction would come back to the board for review and consistency determination with the master plan. We would send the mayor and council a resolution with our recommendations, and then they would take those recommendations into consideration before the final adoption. I have seen other towns with tree protection ordinances, some more restrictive, some less. Typically, what I've seen is when residents or property owners or developers are looking to remove trees, they have to submit a permit application to the borough arborist or the borough clerk. The arborist or clerk makes a determination based on what's in the guidelines of the ordinance, like are the trees small enough, are they diseased, can they be exempted, or do replacement trees have to be put in, or a contribution to the tree protection fund. Then if the permit holder doesn't agree with the arborist or clerk's decision, then they could appeal the permit to the land use board. So we wouldn't necessarily have to have direct say over all of these applications, but if there was an appeal, that could be a way for us to still preserve the borough's interests.
And I guess since I'm a licensed tree expert, but I volunteer all my time to the town, we would probably get an outside consultant for this.
So that's another consideration. In other towns, I have seen that when they adopt a tree protection ordinance, there's also a hired arborist that will conduct the surveys, do the inspections, and make sure that enforcement is occurring.
Okay. And then Mr. Gibbons, I think, had mentioned that there are some applications that don't come through, that contractors don't come through. So they just go through the building department, I guess, is that?
I could probably explain. I function as the zoning officer. So if somebody submits an application for a new home or an addition or some improvement to their property, and the application is fully conforming, it meets all the zoning criteria, then it can be approved administratively. Then they can get their building permits and start work. The only time they come to the board for approval is if they deviate from some aspect of the ordinance. And the building's too tall, it's too close to the setback, the coverage is over, et cetera. And only in those cases when they need relief will they go to the board. Otherwise, it's dealt with administratively. So in the case of tree removal, I'll give my 2 cents. I've worked with a lot of towns that have these types of ordinances. It might make sense for River Edge. Obviously, the devil's in the details. A lot of towns simply do it by caliper. So if you remove a tree of, let's say, a 12-inch caliper or whatever the standard is, that there's either a replacement mechanism, you have to pop in 2 trees on your property, or you pay into this fund, and trees can be planted elsewhere in town. And if you can't meet that criteria, that's when you end up at the board, seeking relief. Or you'd also need some sort of enforcement mechanism if somebody just does what they want to do, and then you dealt with that. And usually you don't find out till, somebody rats them out, and then it gets fun from there, as you can imagine. And I do think you probably would need someone who's qualified to review these things, to do it. There are professionals, whether it's an arborist or a forester, they go by different names, but somebody who's qualified to do it. And I think you would, it would be an administrative process, meaning that it wouldn't go to the board unless there was some aspect of relief. I think that all that's been said, it so far makes sense. But again, it's, one of these things that it should make sense for River Edge, and, just be careful of the unintended consequences, especially for homeowners.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I am a licensed tree. It's a New Jersey licensed tree expert. That is the
Okay.
license in New York, in New Jersey. But I think as a volunteer, that's not something I want to take on in River Edge. So I think, yeah, contracting an arborist. I do enough. It's enough.
I can imagine.
with the public tree permits. That's good. But that's been a successful program too. The mayor and council were on board with that. I forget when we did that. Tom, you were there, but it's been successful because we protected a lot of trees with that. And I think we do, Henry, we wind up giving a lot of the money back after the 2 or 3.
Majority of the money goes back. Yes.
They pay attention, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's been successful.
Any other-
I have a question for Tom. Do we currently require trees to be mapped on applications, on the surveys?
Not to my knowledge, because there's no requirement, there's no preservation requirement. There is with respect to, public trees that are governed, let's say, by the Shade Tree Commission. But, if it's on private property, there's nothing that requires that, to my knowledge.
So we would have to, that would be a new requirement. We would have to have them with a. if
You
they're
would
redeveloping
identify
the property.
trees, right? And I didn't mean to cut you off, Ms. Boland. And, there are some properties that are, you could even say wooded in certain areas. So you would want them to identify trees of a certain quality or size, again, things that are over 12 inches in diameter, et cetera. Not every little sapling or twig, or, is this a tree or not a tree kind of thing. Again, that's how some towns do it. So,
And I
but
think
yes, that
most-
would become a new component of the review process.
Yeah, I think most of the surveys that we're seeing don't get to that level of detail.
They
that
typically
sort of,
don't.
And that's gonna just add some additional cost to applicants, because the survey will have to, include that as an aspect on the survey that they're not otherwise doing, and it's just a basic property survey. I would think. Any other questions from the board?
Let me add 2 cents.
Mr. Merman?
Yeah, because I know you're waiting. Yeah, I agree that I would like to see some sort of a draft and to evaluate. But I would also suggest that whatever your draft specifically calls out and eliminates the action for tree maintenance by the homeowner on some of these particularly these very mature trees, which are approaching serious maintenance. So that's about where I stand. I would like to evaluate a proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Merman. Procedurally, I don't think there's anything for us to do, Ms. Steinle. I think this is really just really correspondence and just reaction to it. So I think at this point, if the board has no further comments, I think Liz, Henry, I'll thank you for appearing this evening. I think we'll just leave the channels of communication open at this point.
Okay. Would you want us to draft something to send to you to look at? And that's the next step?
From Maria, I believe I think procedurally, we'd need something to consider. I don't know if what you're considering at this point is something of an ordinance, or more like terms for an ordinance. Ms.
Or
Styling?
I guess, Mayor, do you think this is something that we should also approach now the mayor and council with? Because if then if we go to them and they're like, no way, then why should we go through this step? I think we're just just making
Yeah,
sure.
to be honest with you, I think it's great getting the input of land use, but if there is not an interest on the mayor and council, then land use is spending a lot of time because it has to come from the mayor and council for the land use to consider and advise and recommend. The real process is to speak to Lizette about coming to the council meeting. And I would recommend that you come to the council meeting with, some sort of structure, some sort of skeleton of, or a sample ordinance that you think the council should consider to some degree.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
for being here.
Have a good night. All right, our next agenda item this evening is under discussion. We are continuing discussion from the previous meeting concerning the possible streamlining of applications for call it simple food handlers license applications. Ms. Steinle, I don't know if you have anything to add to our discussion, Tom, as well?
Yes, so after our meeting, I had some conversations with Ed and Tom and Rob, and we exchanged some emails about our thoughts on the existing ordinance. And generally, it seems like these types of applications do move quickly through the board. However, it is an added expense and time, amount of time for food related businesses that are just changing ownership or changing a type of restaurant, something like that. So there is room for change if that's what the board's interested in, such as removing the site plan review requirement for restaurants or food related businesses that are only changing ownership and not changing the type of activity that's being performed. I think the initial reason why this requirement was created was when retail businesses were in the strip malls in town were converting to restaurants. That changes the parking requirements, that changes how we look at the site based on the use. And so that's why the food handler's license site plan approval requirement was created. I think that it is good. In a lot of cases, we find issues with the sites that can be addressed, but a lot of times the people that are coming before the board for these applications are tenants, and they don't have, and the problems lie with the property owners. And so there's a bit of a disconnect whether the board can actually make the tenants make changes to the properties that they're only tenants on and not actually the owners of. But I think that Tom and I spoke about the three main issues that I think that we can discuss about this topic is one, what are identifying the issues that the applicants are having with this process, identifying the board's concerns, and then who should have oversight over these types of applications, whether it can be handled administratively or it should continue to be handled by the board.
Okay, thank you for that. Comments from the board?
So I wasn't here at the last meeting. I apologize if this was all discussed, but in looking at the River Edge Pizza Kitchen example, if they're not changing anything, I could see. I mean, they've probably been closed for 3 months at this point. The last people were out at the end of December, and I don't know when they're opening, but if they're not changing anything internally, if they're keeping the same equipment, if they're keeping the same pizza place, no new tables. I'm all for, allowing those businesses to open as quickly as possible. We don't want to be a town where, oh, you can't really open a restaurant because it's going to take you 6 months to get through. I'm not saying we're delaying or anything within the building department, but if we can keep this process as easy as possible for a simple change of ownership and, maybe not have them have to come to our board if there's no changes, we want to make it easier for these businesses to open. We have some open storefronts in town, so I'd rather see our businesses open. Major changes, okay, that's a different story. But, if you're just changing the name on the outside of the door, I'm not sure we really need to have to see them, and just to slow them down and cause them, fees on top of the rent that they're probably already paying their landlord.
Mr. Chairman, if I can I jump in for 1 second?
Yes.
All right. So this week, I wanted to do a case study. So I walk into Nick's Bagel and Nick says to me, I'm going to sell the business. What do I need to do? I said, Nick, we're going to find out this week. We made a phone call to Nicole at the building department. Nick's daughter was actually in the bagel shop. I said, follow me. So we went to the building department first. Adriana and Nicole were in there. They handed Nick's daughter the one-page application. They said you could fill it out right here if you have the information. She took a pen, filled it out on the counter, handed it off. From there, I'm not sure if it was Nicole, Adriana said, you're going to need Tom Behrens for a letter of denial. Once he gets this, he'll review it and give a letter of denial and then put it to the planning board. Okay. From there, if that happens, which the assumption was that would actually happen, which I believe it did actually already. We went from there to see Ed at Borough Hall. Ed eloquently laid out everything that she had to do in order to do this. You need to have, here's the application, here's what you need to do. This, because it's Crest Plaza, we actually have site plans on file. I'll provide a certified list of property owners. And I think before the sun set, Ed, because I think you sent me an email, Ed Bowen, who was representing them, either showed up or contacted Ed that afternoon. And I'm not sure if he has his act together or not, but they were going to be on for the next meeting, my understanding. Now, I don't know if they got the notices out in time, whether they put it in the newspaper, but depending on the individual doing it, and maybe because I was there, and maybe I don't think she got special treatment because I was there. It seems like it's a pretty streamlined process if the person who's doing it wants to do it. But Ed, certainly jump in. But it's not this arduous task where it should take 3 months or 6 months. If it takes that long, it's certainly not the town doing it, based on what literally we did in maybe 2 hours. If it was that much, it was probably an exaggeration.
And I'll jump back in. I'm not saying, not by any means trying to say that it's the town's issue.
But what I'm trying to say is it's not that difficult of a process. And what I'm saying is the way it was laid out in the building department, one form, fill it out, put your signatures on it. Thank you very much. Goes to Tom Behrens. This is what I need to do. Send it to the board. It goes to Ed's office. Here's the application. Here's the certified list of property owners. And here's the Ed, and stop me. I even think you said this is basically the public notice you have to send and the letters you have to send. And this is what the body of the letter should say. So we don't even need to get, an author on this, because basically, other than licking a stamp and mailing it, and putting some signatures on a plan saying who's the new corporation, I think that's pretty much it. And if they're not a corporation, not that I want to beat up any of the attorneys, because there's quite a few of them on the screen, you don't even need an attorney. They can represent themselves. So I think a lot of this could be self-created. And I'm not saying the Pizza Kitchen was self-created. It just seems it shouldn't take as long as it did. And even considering they had an attorney that should have been guiding them through the process. But
So-
again, Ed, jump in, tell me if they submitted the stuff, if Ed Bowen has his act together, I'd be curious. I haven't followed up since the other day.
Yeah, I saw him twice today, as a matter of fact. He put the ad in the paper. He went to the post office today. He brought me the checks. So yeah, he thinks he'll be ready by the 22nd, and I have him on the agenda for the 22nd. So since yesterday, instead of extending it out, it's also because we really don't have many applications in the hopper right now. I was able to get them right in on the 22nd, the next meeting.
Do we have any sense of how long, like, are there delays in terms of just being able to get them on the schedule for?
Well,
'Cause that's
a lot
part of the
them-
concern, is that maybe we do have a lot of applications over the next 2 months and they can't get on our docket.
Well, the delays are sometimes trying to get a site plan because that has to come from the owner. So in this case, it's Crest Plaza. They have to track them down and get a copy of the site plan, because our job is to review the site plan approval. That's all we're responsible for. That could take time, and I need a tax certification that their taxes are up to date. That also has to come from the owner of the property.
If I could offer, I understand the issues of the board in wanting to review these things, and I think there's a way to do that. And there may also be a way to maybe minimize the impacts to the businesses at the same time. And there's some towns that do it through instead of sort of a site plan review process, it would be a tenancy, or change in ownership review, or what's called a waiver of site plan process. So again, we have these applications where the site's not really changing, maybe it's just the ownership, just a piece of paper that's changing, but there's nothing changing with the parking or the signage, et cetera. So there are towns that, they have an application process, they have to come before a board and get approval, essentially. But when they do it that way, there's no notice requirement. And I believe in certain cases, they also may not have to be represented by an attorney. So in a simple case, when it's just, pizza shop for a pizza shop, the board still gets to review the site. And the new meet the new applicant, ask them, number of employees, all these questions that we always ask them, you're gonna have any commercial vehicles on the site, welcome to River Edge, and, the typical, line of questioning that we go through, versus, the way we currently have it. And as was already mentioned, Ed mentioned, the logistical things of sometimes trying to track down a site plan or a survey. When you have to comply with the site plan requirements, there's the checklist of all those things you have to hit off. And if you don't have those, in terms of completeness, you can't move forward. So sometimes there's a time element there. And certainly, with the notice, sometimes it works out where if they get, if they're on the ball, and really the onus is on them to do it, right? If they want to open the business, they should be on top of it. And especially if they're represented. But, if you miss the window, that could, bump you off by 2 weeks or a month or whatever the case. So it's, the choice between, I guess, sticking with the current process, or maybe, looking at a way, of maybe modifying it slightly, but still having it where it would come to the board.
So what you just described sounds something like a self-certification process that's reviewed by the board, without having to go through the notice process. Essentially, they basically come in, they've submitted a certification that says we're continuing everything as it was, just new ownership, and we just want the board's review.
Right. It goes by different, tenancy review, waiver of site plan, or whatever you suggested, Mr. Castle. I'm sorry, I forgot what but right. It's some form of certification where you're required to go to the board to get approval, discuss whatever issues there are, going on with the site. It gives the board time to digest and, maybe do a site inspection, that kind of thing. But again, the difference would be that you wouldn't have to do the notice and you wouldn't have to be represented, which tend to be some of the, the components that are, the hardest, if they're hard, to comply with.
So if I could just add on to that, there is a provision in the land use law that permits a governing body to waive notice and publication requirements for minor site plan applications. So we could draft the language of the code to make a review of a food handler's license a minor site plan application. So that would eliminate the applicant's requirement to provide notice and publication, which is an expense if there is a very long list of property owners on the 200-foot list. However, if they came before the board and they were a business, they would have to be represented by an attorney. That's an exception that we wouldn't be able to waive. But if they were just filing as an individual, they could just represent themselves.
We should probably present that choice to the business owner when they apply. And Tom could make a decision whether they require a site plan or just approval from the board without notice. Because the other piece to this is there's an expense involved. They have to file an application fee. They have to give me escrow. It comes close to about $800, some of which they'll get back if we don't use, but it's still, plus they might be losing time on their investment at the same time. So it does become an expense.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the process is, if it continues or changes, it should just be clear. I'm reluctant to, be picking and choosing who goes to the board or doesn't. But I think the board indicated, though, that even in changes of ownership, that they do want some level of review because of past issues with property. So if that's the case, again, there's a way to do that and maybe, just minimize costs. That's my only thought.
I think you can make it somewhat simple. If there is no change to the site plan, then it wouldn't really be, your judgment. If they're not changing anything, then I think that would be a simple bar to use, that if they're not changing this, then they don't need this. Right? So they wouldn't need the site plan and the notice. They can waive the site plan and not have to notice if they're not changing anything to the structure of the building. They're not putting in new equipment, they're not adding seats.
Right, but I think that
Simple
would,
enough for you, right?
yeah, but I think the ordinance still would have to be modified because right now
Right.
it says in all cases, it has to be a site plan. I think that's the key thing, is that it requires a site plan application, so.
So maybe that's the
Need to be
adjustment. to
some
make.
other mechanism and that's where sort of the waiver of site plan comes in, where, again, there's still a board process, but they're not modifying the site, so there's no need for a site plan application per se. That
Right, and we don't need to put that burden on you to decide.
it should
Who
be
needs it, who doesn't,
right.
you know.
right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Pfeffer.
Yeah, just one other thought that just came to my mind. If there, I'm still not clear on really what the problem is, because it doesn't seem like it's a very long process, even under the most arduous circumstances. But I understand that at least we want to try to streamline the process as much as possible, right? To encourage and make it as easy as possible for businesses that are just changing ownership to open up and start doing business. But it seems like the real log jam would happen is if a business missed a meeting, a board meeting, and then would have to wait conceivably a month, or if the calendar is crowded already, maybe 2 or 3 months in a, I won't say worst case scenario, but in a bad scenario, an unusual situation, they might have to wait a while. Let's say it's, they missed the June meeting, and the application is complete, it's ready, but they missed the June meeting. The July meeting is too crowded. There's no August meeting. Now they're into September. That, that's a scenario that we're trying to avoid. But at the same time, the flip side is we want to make sure that the process is reviewable, that there are some level of enforcement, some level of oversight, so that we don't just wave people through just for the sake of making it easy. So I think one thought that I had that maybe we could think about is keep the same process in place, but maybe give a priority or a preference to these type of applications so that they can't get bumped by a crowded calendar. Somebody else may have to get bumped who's already on the calendar. But if there's a business that's just a change of ownership their application is already complete in all other aspects, then they get a priority. And that's something, I don't think that requires an ordinance or a change in any of the legislation. It's, you know, we can control the calendar. And so as a matter of policy, we would say that those kind of applications get priority. There's it's almost like the TSA check when you go to the airport. You know, you get that check, you can bypass the checkpoints. So that's just something I would suggest that we think about, because it allows us to still have the oversight role. It doesn't require any major legislative changes. And at the same time, it gives a preference so that somebody typically would not get stuck just because they've done everything that they were supposed to do, but we don't have room for them on the calendar.
Yeah, I think it's all about striking a balance, and I don't, you know, I hear what everybody's saying, and I think, you know, all valid points. And at the end of the day, I think, you know, it comes back to it's really a combination of things, people knowing the process. And I think to Rob's earlier point, you know, we walked into the bagel store, like he knew exactly who to talk to, where to go, and how the process works. So if you have somebody who knows the process, you can get through it efficiently. And I think it's also incumbent on Ed, and I think he does a great job juggling the agendas for each meeting, because he knows, you know, with his experience, he understands where, you know, one application may be, you know, more burdensome as far as timing goes on the board to review, as opposed to another. And he does, you know, he does what he can based on where everybody comes in the process to make sure that they're trying to get on, you know, when they're ready to go. So I think it's going to be, I don't think there's a perfect solution yet at this, and I don't think I don't want to give up, you know, to your point, you know, Bruce, about the oversight component, because there are instances where we have found previously on these applications where we've been able to fix conditions. And I think, you know, the parking down at the restaurant at the south end of town was one item where, you know, we were looking at things. I think the other example I think was brought up before, Jim, you had mentioned, was the fence line behind the market, the old food town market there. There was a food handler's license going on over there. We were able to fix some conditions. So I think for now, I think we just monitor the process. And Ed, if you and Tom, if you see things changing drastically, yeah, as you know, as we get these applications in, you know, maybe we revisit the issue. But at this point, I'm not sure that there's really anything more we can do unless anybody else feels differently.
Yeah, just let me say, it's ironic that we've had two similar applications in the last few weeks of change of ownerships, and they're both getting through very quickly. You know, as I said, some of the issues are trying to get in touch with the owner of the property to get this land, to get the site plan, and if necessary, a survey. Then they have to make 15 copies of this. They have to go to find a place to make copies. They don't have an architect because it's just a change of ownership, so they're not familiar with the process, and I'm there to help them, which is what I try to do. So we do seem to get them through pretty fast. So I have no problem with doing that, juggling calendars.
And again, Chairman, I think the pizza kitchen was probably not the norm. I think that was you know, it was just abnormal for whatever reason. And again, I don't know. I'm really not involved in it, so to speak. And again, that's why if I wasn't eating carbs this week, I wouldn't have been involved in it if I was on a protein diet. But the bottom line is, and maybe there was some preferential treatment because I went there. I don't think so. You go to the building department, and maybe what needs to be done, I don't know how many restaurants are in town, maybe just a little blurb to these owners to say, if you decide to do this, this is the process, or to the owners of the building, saying this is it. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Because again, one page, spoke to Tom, and maybe obviously I have Tom's cell phone number. Most people are not going to have that, but regardless, it was filled out. Adriana said to me, now it either get, Tom, I don't know, did it get faxed to you, the paperwork, or did you picked it up that afternoon? I'm not sure how you got it.
I mean, we got it through email and, yeah, I mean, the turnaround time is not extensive,
Right.
there's a template letter. When they don't need relief, it's not, I mean, frankly, it's not a big deal.
Right, and then it goes to Ed, and literally Ed, I wasn't even involved in it. Ed was speaking one-to-one and was basically laying out the whole laundry list on what to do.
Yeah, and we have a board page on the borough website. I mean, maybe this is a place where we could put that kind of information
Well,
to you too.
I don't want to disparage anybody, but, and, you know, certainly Tom Barrett at this stage of the game should know how to do this. So I think there's probably that particular situation, there might have been some external forces going on, not just this. That's, again, I don't know for sure. But I think there was more to it than just, it took too long with the town. That's it. I'm done for the night. I'm off the pulpit.
I think going back to that one point, most business owners have no clue how to handle any, and homeowners have no clue how to handle any of this stuff either. So, you know, any more information we can have out there that's, you know, when you sell your business, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, an attorney knows this stuff, or they should. But I don't think owners or, you know, owners of businesses or someone potentially buying have any clue what they're supposed to be doing, especially if they're first time doing something. So anything we can have out there to make it easier for them.
Right. Well, Marina, Tom, and thanks for pulling that together. I think at this point, if anybody else has anything further, I think maybe we just maintain status quo and keep monitoring the situation to see if there's any drastic changes. Okay. That said, we've reached the end of our agenda this evening. Unless anybody has anything further, I will look for a motion to, I mean, we're not going to open to the public because we really have nothing, we didn't hear any applications. per se,
No, we
so
don't have to do that.
Okay, so with that, unless anybody has anything further, I will entertain a motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pfeffer. All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Any opposed, any abstained? We are officially closed. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a great
Good
day.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.